Hello, my name is Thomas Cruz, and on behalf of Biblically Apologetic YouTube and biblicallyapologetic.wordpress.com, I would like to welcome our participants tonight. The topic of the debate is if the Jesus described in the New Testament was an accurate depiction. Both opponents affirmed that Jesus existed as a man, but do not agree on his divine nature or the miracles in which he performed. Taking the affirmative position is Mr. Courtney Thompson. Mr. Thompson is a caregiver at Addis Home Care and is currently taking theological studies at Grand Canyon University. Mr. Thompson is the founder of biblicallyapologetic.wordpress.com and contributor to the Does God Exist Facebook page. Taking the negative is Mr. Brett Strong. Mr. Strong is the author of the ebook 12 Facts That Prove That the New Testament Jesus is a Fictional Character from Ancient Times. Mr. Strong has debated many of the world's top Christian apologists, including Greg Kokel, Frank Turek, Thomas Cruz, Matt Slick, and was a featured guest on the Unbelievable radio show in London, England. The moderator in this debate is not neutral to the topic at hand, but will act in accordance with the rules. He will not be able to give any opinion on the debate and will only be included in the debate to keep time and make sure that the debaters remain within the constraints of the debate rules. The debate structure will go as follows. Each speaker will get a 15-minute opening statement. This statement will be an attempt by each speaker to lay out their arguments in a coherent manner. Each speaker will give a 10-minute rebuttal to their opponent's opening statements. Any deviation from the statements given by their opponent in the opening statement or in past debates will be mere assertion. Each speaker will then get a 10-minute cross-examination period that will directly correspond to the argument presented in the opponent's opening statement and their rebuttal. Each questioner may only ask questions, and the responder may only answer in the form of statements. Any comparisons to past debates, statements, or opinion will be allowed if and only if they directly correspond to the opening statement or the rebuttal and are used as comparisons. Each speaker will get another 10 minutes of cross-examination in response to their opponent. Once again, the questioner may only ask questions. The responder may only respond in the form of a statement. Each speaker will then give a 10-minute closing statement. This is free reign. We ask that each speaker stay within the 10-minute time constraint, but we will give up to 12 minutes to properly close out the argument. The order of speaking will go as follows. We will flip-flop the order of each segment to make it as fair as possible. The order will be Thompson, Strong, opening statements. Strong, Thompson. Rebuttal. Thompson, Strong, cross-examination 1. Strong, Thompson, cross-examination 2. Thompson, Strong, closing statements. Do each of the participants agree to the rules set forth in the debate?
Yes.
Yes.
Do each of the participants agree to the debate being recorded and made open to the public?
Yes.
Yes.
Once again, on behalf of the Biblically Apologetic, we would like to thank our debaters. And without further ado, Mr. Thompson, your opening statement time will begin when you begin speaking.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, tonight I would like to thank the moderator, Mr. Cruz, for moderating tonight's debate, and I would also like to thank Mr. Brett Strong for not only being my challenger for tonight's debate, but for also offering up a wonderful and vitally important issue for both believers and non-believers alike. While preparing for tonight's dialogue, I have taken some time to analyze some of Mr. Strong's positions regarding the topic this evening, and I hope tonight I will be able to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt why I genuinely believe that my opponent's views regarding the topic tonight are radically skeptical. Yes, that's right. I genuinely do believe that in light of the evidences for the historicity and the accuracy of the New Testament for depicting who Jesus was is actually contradicted by my opponent's views. Well, how would I actually begin by making this argument? Let me begin by making the following statement. As a Christian, I genuinely believe that the Bible is true. This includes the New Testament in its entirety. But as a Christian, I also recognize that we have different levels or types of genre within the New Testament. For the sake of tonight's argument, I will be trying to limit my views on who Jesus was according to the Gospels. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, it means this. In light of the topic at hand tonight, I believe that it is difficult to debate the historicity and the accuracy of the miracle claims as recorded in the New Testament regarding Jesus of Nazareth for one simple reason. This is only because I genuinely believe that my opponent has a truncated view on historiography in the first place. What exactly do I mean? Well, if you were to ask my opponent, I believe tonight you will see that if you were to ask him regarding miracles, he would say a priori he rejects them. What exactly do I mean? Well, let me read a brief quote from a known scholar by the name of Rudolf Bultmann. One moment, guys. Okay. Rudolf Bultmann actually stated the historical method includes the presupposition that history is a unit in the sense of a closed continuum of effects in which individual events are connected by the succession of cause and effect. This closedness means that the continuum of historiographical happenings cannot be rent by the interference of supernatural, transcendent powers, and therefore there is no miracle in this sense of the word. Close quote. Well, why is this very interesting to me? Well, for simple presuppositions. As a Christian, I believe in the Bible, and I also believe that the miracles of the New Testament, especially when identifying Jesus, are there for one reason: theological significance. In fact, this actually is going to bring me into my second point in tonight's discussion, which is going to be the consideration of historical analyzation of the evidences. Well, what do I mean? As I stated earlier, I will be limiting my discussion tonight to the Gospels for the sake of argument, because I know going into Paul and many of these other issues can get very off track. But I do believe they are important, and if we do get into Paul and other issues regarding the New Testament, we can go there. But for the sake of argument, let me explain why many historical scholars do not like the New Testament, especially the Gospels, when it comes to their depiction of who Jesus is. First and foremost, when we look at the Gospels, what do we see? Well, we have many memorable statements known by the Christian and atheist alike. For example, John 3:16, "For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish but have everlasting life." Or, matter of fact, what about the beginning of John, which interestingly enough identifies Jesus as divine from the very first statement in the book by saying the following: "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." Now, this is very interesting. You want to know why? Twofold. Number one, the Gospel of John is the earliest attested New Testament book, not to mention that the New Testament in and of itself is the earliest collection of ancient documents produced from the first century. Now, this is very interesting. You want to know why? Don't worry. I'll go ahead and fill you in with the information. When we analyze who Jesus is according to the Gospels, it is unbelievably clear that according to every Gospel, Jesus is divine. Now, going back to John, the reason why many scholars, skeptics alike, don't necessarily like John is very simple: the theology. But, interestingly enough, the earliest Gospel claimed by many scholars, which would be the Gospel of Mark, also identifies Jesus as divine from the very beginning. If you don't mind, let me take a few minutes to read a couple of the introduction passages, and then I will go ahead and give a correlating understanding from what I believe is a simple reading of the text. Now, in Mark chapter 1, verse 1, we begin with the following: And by the way, I must also attest that this account in Mark chapter 1 is most likely the most primitive form of Jesus' baptism tradition. Interestingly enough, this is also one of the most historical facts about Jesus himself. You can ask skeptics for the likes of Dale Martin of Yale University, who actually would affirm this is one of the main things we can identify and know for certain regarding the historical Jesus. Going back into Mark, let's begin reading. Mark chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet. Pause. Before I continue with the rest of the text, we must recognize exactly where this quote is coming from and who Mark is identifying as who in light of the context. Let's continue. First and foremost, if we were to analyze where this text came from, it actually comes from Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. This is a quote, "I am sending my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way. The voice of the one shouting in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make his path straight." Pause. Now, I hope you were able to catch on what I just stated there. Within this context, Mark is asserting that, number one, the beginning of the gospel essentially starts with his baptism. Point number two is within this context, we will see two individuals take a very prominent stance in light of the rest of the text. And also, by the ending of where I will be concluding my Mark reading tonight, we will actually see that according to the most primitive New Testament Gospel of Mark, we have an unbelievably strong and thick and rich theological background behind the text. Now, prepare the way for the Lord. If we were to go back to that Old Testament text in Isaiah, what will we find? Interestingly enough, we will find that the word Lord is in all caps. We recognize as Christians and students of historiography and religious studies that Lord in the Hebrew text, translated into English in all caps, represents the name of the covenant God of the Old Testament. Now, continuing at verse 4 in Gospel of Mark, chapter 1. In the wilderness, John the Baptizer began preaching a baptism of repentance for forgiveness of sins. People from the whole Judean countryside and all of Jerusalem were going out to him, and he was baptizing them in the Jordan River as they confessed their sins. John wore a garment made of camel's hair with a leather belt around his waist, and he ate locusts and wild honey. He, referring to John, proclaimed, "One more powerful than I is coming after me. I am not worthy to bend down and untie the straps of his sandals." "I baptize you with water, but he will baptize you with the Holy Spirit." Pause. According to Mark, he makes an extremely large and declarative claim that the one who is in the wilderness crying out, according to verses 3 in the first chapter, is actually John the Baptist. So who is this Lord in which John the Baptist is preparing the way for? Well, let's continue to read. Now in those days, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan River. And just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw the heavens splitting apart and the Spirit descending upon him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my dear Son. In you I take great delight." The Spirit immediately drove him into the wilderness. Pause. Now, right here, we have an unbelievable confirmation, not just from an exterior worldview, but especially from a biblical worldview regarding the identity of Jesus being God. Now, who is this who is being called God? Very clearly Jesus. And who is it that identifies Jesus as God? Well, according to the text, we have the Father stating from heaven, "You are my beloved Son," and we have the Spirit descending upon him as a dove. Now, this is unbelievable, people, because I really don't believe many will understand exactly what I'm saying here. Essentially, what I'm getting to is that from the very beginning of Mark, we have clear testimony that Jesus is God. Not only that, we have multiple witnesses throughout Luke and Matthew that also record this event within a similar context, all to identify the Messianic divinity of the Messiah, Jesus himself. Now, to close off with my last statement tonight, I would like to get into some of the evidences regarding this issue and how we actually understand these evidences, because ultimately the one thing we must do when it comes to history is harmonize. There is no way, shape, or form to not harmonize what we're talking about regarding history, especially early attestation, multiple authors writing on the same individual and the same events regarding his lifetime. Now, when we're talking about harmonization, what exactly do I mean? Let me be very quick here, because I see my time is getting very short. Harmonization is history. In other words, if we were to go to, say, Paul, who was not actually an eyewitness, but who was contemporaneous with the eyewitnesses of Jesus, we would also recognize that he too has a very high Christology. But the reason why I do not necessarily want to go to Paul right now is because Paul was not an eyewitness. That's right, people. Paul was not an eyewitness, but you know who was? As I stated earlier, there are literary functions in between the Gospel of John, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke, and et cetera, in which all identify these documents as historically accurate, multiply attested, independent from each other, sources that do depict the very same individual by the name of Jesus Christ. With no more delay, I don't have much else to say, except I really do hope that tonight the audience does two things. First and foremost, audience, please test both myself and my opponent for consistency, because ultimately the consistency is what determines the truth. Now, what kind of consistency? Well, we will be dialoguing over quite a few issues, and I genuinely believe that many of these issues, once brought up, will become into fruition, and we will be able to identify the failure of either presentation. Thank you very much, and that will conclude my opening statement.
Okay, Mr. Thompson, thank you for your opening statement. Mr. Strong, you will have 15 minutes, and your time will begin as soon as you begin to speak.
Okay, once again, this is Brett Strong. My YouTube channel is Brett Strong. Make sure you visit me. One of the leading atheists in the world. I take on all challengers. Now, the debate is about, is the New Testament Jesus real? Not the historical Jesus, but the New Testament Jesus, the superhero Jesus. The guy that flies in the air, walks on water, tells a storm to shut up, and it does. He vanishes into thin air, puff, gone. He appears out of thin air. He magically goes through solid walls and locked doors. Flies in the air and disappears into a rain cloud. Acts 1:9. Read it yourself. In the Matthew, he flies off into the cosmos as his disciples wave goodbye. Also in the Gospels, this Jesus character raises a rotten, smelly corpse back to life. 4-day-old rotted corpse. This superhero character, Jesus of the Gospels, he gets tortured to death, nailed to a cross, thrown into a grave, but yet a few days later, he's out hanging out with his buddies, eating fish. Read the end of Luke, the last couple chapters of Luke. Jesus reappears after being tortured to death, stabbed in the side, thrown in the grave. A couple of days later, he appears like, hey, what's up, fellas? It's me. Feel the holes in my hands. And he sat down and ate some fish. Come on, folks. The New Testament Jesus, the Jesus of the Gospels, that superhero Jesus, that's pure fiction. It's no different than a Marvel comic book character like Superman or Spider-Man. It's pure fiction. Like if you watch Spider-Man movie, it is set in real New York City, but Spider-Man himself is fake. Just like the New Testament Jesus. Israel, Jerusalem is real. But Jesus himself, that character, the superhero character, is fake. The Gospels, Jesus, the New Testament Jesus, the superhero Jesus, he's no different than Superman or Spider-Man. It's pure fiction. That's why he walks on water, turns water into wine, tells a storm to shut up in the desert. He vanishes into thin air. He appears out of thin air. He goes through solid walls and locked doors once again, folks. He flies in the air and disappears into a rain cloud. He said he's coming back surfing the cloud on Matthew 24. Read it. He said he's coming back surfing the cloud. And if you read Revelation, he's coming back on a white horse, flying white horse. Folks, common sense tells you the New Testament Jesus, the Jesus of the Gospels, is a fictional character. Let me show you. The Dead Sea Scrolls, written between 270 BCE to 70 AD. Written by Jews, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Written by Jews, in the same area Jesus supposedly lived and walked. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were written before, during, and after the time Jesus supposedly lived on earth. And these Dead Sea Scrolls were written by Jews who lived in the same area Jesus lived in. And there's a huge commentary section in those Dead Sea Scrolls, but guess what? They put together over 1 million pieces of the Dead Sea Scroll, and Jesus was not found one time. Over 1 million pieces pieced together. Jews living during the time Jesus supposedly walked this earth and did all those miracles. But yet, those same Jews, Jesus is not found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Neither are his supposedly disciples. Let's move on. Archaeology. Tens of thousands of archaeologists have dedicated their entire lives to find one scrap of Jesus info. Writings, inscriptions, carpentry works, dwelling place, anything of Jesus. Tens of thousands of archaeologists have dedicated their entire lives scraping over the area Jesus supposedly lived, walked, did his miracles, super famous in. And these archaeologists have come up empty-handed. Nothing. Millions, if not billions of dollars have been spent to find any Jesus info. Anything. Zero. Nothing. Nada. Zip. Folks, during the time of 4 BCE to 30 AD, there were about 1 million Jews who lived in Palestine. The same area Jesus lived, about 1 million Jews lived there. But yet not one human being ever recorded Jesus of the Gospels. Not one person. 1 million Jews alive during the time of Jesus, 4 BCE to 30 AD in Palestine. 1 million Jews. And not one person recorded a Jesus ever walking this earth doing any miracles. So let it be said, Dead Sea Scrolls, Jesus is not found. Archaeology, Jesus is not found. Let's move on. All scientists, Einstein, Stephen Hawking, Isaac Newton, etc., 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 all atheist, Christian, agnostic scientists would tell you, these people who study the outer world, they study the cosmos down to the subatomic level, and they would tell you, Jesus is not found. Zero. zip, nada. Go to Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Duke, Cornell, Oxford. Go to the greatest universities in the world, to the smallest. They all would tell you Jesus is not found in reality. Folks, these people dedicate their entire lives. Einstein, Stephen Hawking, Isaac Newton, they dedicate their entire lives to studying the outer world. And not one time any scientist in the world has recorded Jesus as being real, Jesus as being demonstrated as being real. Not one time. If me and my opponent were sitting in different stadiums, I would have all the scientists in history sit in my stadium. His stadium would be completely empty. He would be saying, hello, hello, hello. All scientists throughout history would be sitting in my stadium and say, yeah, we back Brett strong. The New Testament Jesus is not found to be real in reality. Imagine him in your mind all you want, but in reality, all scientists in the world would sit in my stadium and agree with me and abide with me. But in my opponent, his stadium will be completely empty. Not a soul, not one scientist would show up. Not one. Makes sense because the New Testament Jesus is fiction. Technology. We have the most powerful tools known to mankind. Sonar, radar, infrared lights, heat vision, telescopes, space satellites that orbit the Earth 24/7, 365. We have the Hubble Space Scope. We have jets, submarines, militaries, etc., etc., etc. Jesus is not found. Nada. Zip. Zero. Remember in Luke, Jesus said, it is me when he resurrected, flesh and bone. Come touch my hands. Physical being, Jesus said, it's me. So we're talking about a physical being. But yet, in all of history, sonar history, radar history, infrared light history, heat vision history, telescope history, space satellite history, Hubble telescope history, military history around the world. Jesus is not found. Zero. Zip. Nada. There is not a trace of Jesus in the entire world throughout technology. Let's take it deeper. There's about 2 billion Christians. Gather them all together. They can get down on their knees. And my opponent, too, he can get down on his knees and beg and plead for his Jesus to show himself real to the world. He can weep and cry and fast, my opponent. But as we all know, Jesus would not appear. My opponent can't do miracles either to prove that Jesus is real. He can't walk on water, my opponent. He can't do any miracle. So whether he pray on his knees and beg and pleaded and fasted and starved himself to death, or whether he tried to do a miracle which he couldn't do, Jesus is not found. It cannot be demonstrated. He will not show up for you, folks. And rightfully so, because Jesus is a fictional character. Jesus is a fictional character. My opponent has chose to believe in Santa Claus, a modern Superman, the ancient Superman, the ancient Spider-Man. My opponent has chosen to believe a comic book character, a superhero character named Jesus of the New Testament. That's what my opponent is espousing. A mere comic book character as being real. And if I ask my opponent to demonstrate that his Jesus is real, you don't have to empirically show me he's real. Do a miracle, because, folks, in the New Testament, my opponent would vouch for me. The New Testament, one of the rules for proof was miracles. Perform a miracle. Jesus came performing millions and millions of miracles. Reality, he is not found. His disciples in the Bible performed all kinds of miracles. But in reality, followers of Jesus, no miracles. My opponent, follower of Jesus, no miracles. See, in the Bible, all kinds of proof. Reality, zero. It's like a comic book. In the comic book for Superman, Spider-Man, all kinds of miracles. In reality, nothing. Comic book, Superman, Clark Kent, mere man, but with superhero powers. Spider-Man, Peter Parker is his name, mere man with superhero powers. Jesus, the New Testament, mere man with superhero powers. You see the connection, folks? It's all fiction, whether it's the New Testament Jesus superhero character or whether it's Spider-Man or Superman. It's all fiction, folks. Nothing wrong with believing in fiction. Nothing wrong with kids believing in Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy. Nothing wrong with my opponent believing in Jesus. Just don't bring hell to the table, sin to the table, obey the Bible to the table. That's my problem with my opponent. It's not his fairy tale beliefs. He's a grown man. If he wants to believe fairy tales and live for fairy tales and die for fairy tales, by all means, that's his prerogative. I have no problem with my opponent or any Christian believing in Jesus. But don't bring the negativity like, once again, hell, sinner, obey the Bible. My opponent cannot prove, not only my opponent cannot demonstrate the superhero Jesus is real, he cannot demonstrate that God is real, or heaven is real, or hell is real, or the Holy Spirit is real. Do you see, folks, how lacking my opponent is? All his core beliefs, God, Jesus, heaven, hell, Holy Spirit, he cannot prove them to be real at all. He cannot demonstrate them to be real at all. Zero, nada, nothing he can do. Makes sense, folks, because it's fiction. It's all fiction. The Christian God, Jesus, heaven, hell, the Holy Spirit, it's all fiction of the Bible. It's all fiction. But it's okay, once again. It's okay to believe in fiction, folks. You Christians, my opponent. Just don't be dogmatic with hell. Obey the Bible and sin. Because after all, your God, your Jesus, is simply fiction. So enjoy the fiction, but don't be dogmatic. And that's my 15-minute opening speech.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Strong, for your opening statement. Now, we will now be moving into the rebuttal section of the debate. This section will start with Mr. Strong. Your 10 minutes starts when you begin speaking.
Okay, my opponent brought up Dale Martin. He's a Yale professor of ancient history, very elite scholar in ancient history. It's funny you brought up Dale Martin because Dale Martin would tell you that as an ancient historian, the miracles can't use the miracles of Jesus when you do ancient history. They're wiped off the plate from the very beginning. So for my opponent to mention Dale Martin, he's refuted his own self because Dale Martin would tell my opponent, dude, the miracles of Jesus, when you do ancient history, you can't use the miracles. They're discounted. They're voided. They're null and void, useless, worthless, cannot be used. They're out the way. When you take the miracles off the New Testament gospel Jesus, when you take away Jesus' miracles, you don't have anything but a little unknown man. See, Dale Martin would tell you, yeah, he believes that there was a historical Jesus. Me too. I don't exactly believe it, but it's very plausible. People from different facets of science have studied the bone boxes of Jews from the first century, male Jews from the first century. They studied the bone boxes, picked at the bones, and they would say that the average Jew in the first century, average Jewish male was 5'1", about 110 pounds, dark skin and curly hair. Folks, does that sound like your Jesus? A 5'1" guy weighing 110 pounds with dark skin and curly hair. Does that sound like your Jesus? Because the historical Jesus would have been about 5'1", 110 pounds, dark skin and curly hair. Does that sound like the Jesus you prayed to? A 5'1" guy weighing 110 pounds, dark skin, curly hair. Does that sound like the Jesus you want to spend eternity with? The historical Jesus? If there was a historical Jesus? Del Martin would tell you that the historical Jesus, as my opponent brought up Del Martin, the historical Jesus was a nobody. He was a nobody. That's why history did not record Jesus during the time he lived. 4 BC, 8 to 30 AD. History did not record Jesus. No one did because he was a nobody. Del Martin would tell you. He lived. He got in trouble with some Jews. The Romans took him, whipped him, nailed him to death, made him carry the cross. They hung him on the cross, nailed him to the cross, stabbed him in the side, and lightly fed his body to the dogs. And that was it, folks. And afterwards, they started oral tradition, oral fictional fantasy stories about this guy reappearing. In the story from Apostle Paul just basically said in 1 Corinthians 15:3 that he admitted, hey, someone sold me this super fanciful oral ideal of dying and rising in Messiah named Jesus. He admitted, hey, I'm just telling you what they told me. He doesn't even identify who told him the story, but he admitted 1 Corinthians 15:3, like, hey, yeah, somebody sold me this ideal. Somebody told me this ideal. Yeah, folks. Later on, he says he had visions of this Jesus. And later on, Paul says that he had a feeling in his heart Jesus was real. Is that what you want to base your life on? My opponent mentioned the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, especially John. Well, all 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, they're all anonymous. They're all undated. Origin unknown. They're all written in the third person. They copied each other, folks. Folks, do you want to base your life on ancient books that they're anonymous? Like when you read the Gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, those are titles. So forget about those titles. Just put Clash of the Titans, 1, 2, 3, 4, Clash of the Titans. That's what the Gospel would be. Instead of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, make people think, well, Matthew and Luke, John wrote these. No, those are just titles. Those books are anonymous, undated, origin unknown, written in the third person, and they copied each other. They plagiarized each other. So forget about the Gospel according to Mark, Luke, John. Just think about Clash of the Titans, 1, 2, 3, 4. That'll get your mind off John, Matthew, Luke, John. Now, would you want to base your life on books labeled Clash of the Titans 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're anonymous, undated, origin unknown, written in the third person, and they plagiarize each other, and the main character is flying around in the air, walking on water, disappearing in the air, he's raising zombies from the grave, becoming a zombie himself, rising from the graves, he's flying up into the cosmos. Would you base your life on this type of material, folks? Since my opponent brought up the Gospels, let me break it down. If you took what we have in the Gospels to any court, they would say, this is not evidence. Because Bar Ehrman would tell you, Bar Ehrman is one of the leading scholars in the world in this area. He would tell you that when it comes to the Gospels, we don't have a copy of 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 a copy, etc., 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 of any book of the New Testament. Folks, would you base your life on something like that? Writings that are 100% anonymous. We don't know who wrote them. It's all a guess, folks. No one signed their name. It's a guess. Remember, label East Gospel, Clash of the Titans, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, there's no names, right? Because no one signed them. They're anonymous. They're undated. We don't know when they were written. It's a guess that they were written when scholars claim they were written in the first century. It's all a guess. Where they were written, nobody knows. Again, they're written in the third person. That's typical for fiction. Read fiction. Typical fiction is written in the third person. And once again, they plagiarized each other, had each other's books, and copied each other. Folks, and when you add in the main characters flying in the air like Superman, walking on water, disappearing in thin air, appearing out of thin air like the invisible man. This is pure fiction. So for my opponent to mention Dale Martin, which Dale Martin disputes him and says, no, the New Testament Jesus, no, it's just a historical Jesus. All that miracle stuff is fiction, cannot be used. And then he's going to bring in the Gospels, well, anonymous, undated, origin unknown, written in the third person. They plagiarize each other. The main character, Jesus, flying in the air, zipping through walls, flying off into the cosmos. Folks, come on. This is fiction. This is pure fiction. Just like when we hear of other people doing miracles, we know it's fiction. We don't need to investigate. When we hear about people flying in the air, disappearing through walls, flying off into the cosmos, turning water into wine, we don't need to investigate that. We naturally know when we hear somebody doing that, that's fiction. Science shows us that, hey, man, humans, whether they claim to have superpowers or not, can't do miracles. They can't walk on water. They can't fly in the air. They can't disappear in the thin air and appear on the thin air. They can't magically go through walls. They can't. They cannot do these things. Any scientist will tell you that, folks. Common sense will tell you that. But once again, as I finish up, nothing wrong with believing in fairy tales. Just don't be dogmatic with hell. Obey the Bible, sin. Believe in your fairy tale Jesus flying in the air, zipping up to the cosmos, coming back flying, surfing the clouds, coming back riding a white police horse. It's okay. Believe in that. Kids believe in Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, Tooth Fairy. It's okay. Just don't be dogmatic, Christians. And to my opponent, as I've shown you, for him to bring up the Gospels, it's fallacious. No court in the world would accept the Gospels as evidence. We don't have any originals, anything close to original. And they're anonymous and undated and origin unknown and written in the third person, and they plagiarize each other. That's the end of my 10-minute rebuttal.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Strong. Mr. Thompson, your 10-minute rebuttal will begin when you begin to speak, but let me add, this is only in response to Mr. Strong's opening statement. May begin
no problem.
Whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you very much. Well, first and foremost, I would like to point out that the majority of the statements in which were just made by my opponent essentially substantiate my opening statement claim of analyzing presuppositions, especially as I quoted from Rudolf Bultmann, the acclaimed New Testament scholar, when he stated, I quote, "The historical method includes the presupposition that history is a unit in the sense of closed continuum of effects in which individual events are connected by a succession of cause and effect. This closeness means that the continuum of the historical happenings cannot be rent by the interference of supernatural transcendent powers, and therefore there is no miracle in this sense of the word," end quote. Now, first and foremost, in light of this quote and in many of the arguments that have been presented this evening by my opponent, you would notice one thing. They presuppose miracles can't happen. I really hope that you consider this in light of the fact that he is analyzing Jewish material. Jewish material, both biblical and non-biblical, Talmudic, all of it is fairly theological throughout it. So in order for my opponent to actually analyze these individuals, their writings, and the context, he actually has to strip the context, he has to isolate a passage, and he has to try to impose his own modern-day understanding into it. This is a major flaw of my opponent this evening, and I would like to very briefly explain why. The request for empirical evidence for a miracle is like asking for a married bachelor. Point blank, period. It's as simple as that. The reason why I say that is because we actually do have evidence. My opponent tonight constantly would say we don't have any Jewish people writing about Jesus. Again, interestingly enough, Dale Martin himself, the very same scholar that I believe my opponent misunderstood me when I utilized his quote regarding the baptism of Jesus being one of the most significant and identifiable situations within Jesus' lifetime. I think he completely misanalyzed my quote, especially in regards to this. I'm not sure how much reading my opponent has done on Dale Martin, but for the sake of argument, he has a book that is available in stores and possibly at a local library called Speculations in Ancient Times, where he actually analyzes the differences in opinion between the term speculation being used by the Greeks and the Jews of the first century. This and in the second century as well. This is very important, and I will get to this point a little bit later. But yes, I do believe that my opponent misunderstood me when I utilized Dr. Dale Martin, on that quote. Again, Dr. Dale Martin stated in a YouTube video on the historicity of Jesus that yes, he would agree, and he goes into much deeper detail in this in his book on the New Testament survey, but he would agree that there are essentially three main facts about Jesus' life, and the first one being his baptism by John the Baptist in the River of Jordan during the first century, possibly, and I believe he would affirm this date, possibly around the year 27 AD. Now, interestingly enough, the way we get the possibility of 27 AD is by analyzing the years as contained within the individual Gospels themselves, because neither one of these Gospels were written by the same person. But yet, we do not see what my opponent stated earlier, which was a constant copying of copies and utilizing another person's text in order to create their text. If my opponent wanted to make that argument, I would ask him to substantiate that in light of the books themselves. For example, I don't have a problem with affirming that Luke used other sources. Why not? He states so very clearly. And not to mention, we are talking about a time in ancient history where the literacy was very minimum. And it doesn't make any sense at all to correlate Jewish information to give it to the pagans who didn't like the Jews in the first place in order to get them to convert to Judaism or Christianity that was originally led by Jewish people. That's right. I hope you guys heard that. We can go back and listen to the tape. My opponent did say there were no Jews of the first century that wrote about Jesus, and then he went back and said, yeah, the books were probably written in the first century, but it's all guesswork. Interestingly enough, all of the scholars my opponent has mentioned tonight, whether it be Dr. Bart Ehrman, who I will be getting to in just a second, or Dale Martin, they both agree that these texts were originally written in the first century, anywhere from about 50 to 90 AD, especially the Gospels. Paul, we can throw Paul in there too, because many scholars would say that Paul was probably the first author of the New Testament. And interestingly enough, I don't know how familiar my opponent is with some of the people, again, that he has mentioned tonight. For example, like I said earlier, Dr. Bart Ehrman. Yes, my opponent is absolutely right when he talked about the textual transmission of the text and that we don't have any of the originals. Yes, my opponent is absolutely right in misquoting Jesus. Dr. Bart Ehrman did state, not only do we not have the originals, we do not have the first copies of the originals. We don't even have copies of the copies of the copies of the originals, or copies of the copies of the copies of the originals. What we do have are copiers made later and much later, and these copies all differ from one another in many thousands of places. These copies differ from one another in so many places that we don't even know how many differences there are. Dr. Ehrman continued and stated, we could go on nearly forever talking about specific places in which the text of the New Testament came to be changed. And I would actually agree with him in some particular places. For example, 1 John 5, 7, and 8, the longer ending of Mark, and the woman caught in adultery in the Gospel of John, chapter 8. Those are the three largest textual variants. But what my opponent doesn't know that Dr. Bart Ehrman has stated, I presume, in regards to the textual transmission of the New Testament, and in fact his own field, which is New Testament textual critical studies, he states the following in his book, in a journal article, TC, a journal article of biblical textual criticism produced in 1998. Dr. Ehrman stated the following: if the primary purpose of the discipline, speaking of textual criticism, is to get back to the original text, please listen, we may as well admit either defeat or victory, depending on how one chooses to look at it, because we are not getting much closer to the original text than we already are. At this stage, our work on the original amounts to little more than tinkering. That's right. You have heard Dr. Ehrman said it best. If my opponent actually wants to say that the New Testament is not textually reliable, or we do not know what the original manuscripts say, we can go back to his favorite scholar and use his own information in his book promotion that is located on YouTube, in which he actually contradicts all of what my opponent stated for his most recent book, Jesus, the Historical Jesus of Nazareth. Yes, that is right. If the listeners of this debate want to take some time, and I genuinely do choose, or I hope that you do, because I really do hope that the listeners of this debate take this as a starting point and not a finishing point, especially in light of all the evidence and the arguments being brought to the table. Now, again, this is what Dr. Ehrman, who my opponent just said, he states that he doesn't believe these documents are from this time period, or we can't get back to the original, or we can't know nothing about the historical Jesus. I would ask you to do two things. First and foremost, go to YouTube, look up his promotional book for misquoting Jesus. Look up the YouTube promotional link for misquoting Jesus. And after you do that, look up the YouTube book promotional link done for the Historical Jesus of Nazareth, the Jesus Existed book. Because interestingly enough, when he stated all we have is copies of copies, we can't get to the original, he absolutely contradicts himself in that own analysis while promoting the Historical Jesus book. So either my opponent is actually going to be fair, allow the arguments to speak for themselves, or he's going to have to reject them a priori because he doesn't like to deal with the evidence in its entirety. Thank you very much, and that will conclude my rebuttal period.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thompson. That concludes our rebuttal segment of the debate. Now, we will begin our first cross-examination section. In this section, once again, the questioner will ask questions, and the answerer will answer the questions in a form of a statement. Each speaker will have 10 minutes in this first segment, and it will cover any and all things stated in the debate thus far. Mr. Thompson, you ended our last segment, so you will start the first cross-examination period. Mr. Thompson, your 10 minutes will start when you begin speaking.
Thank you very much. Mr. Strong, I really did love your opening presentation, but I have a couple questions regarding it. Did you state in your opening statement that we don't know if the Gospels were originally written in the first century?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So do you believe in harmonization as an accurate process for doing historiography?
No.
Oh, okay. So would you say that, for example, all you need is one piece of evidence in ancient history to substantiate an individual's life?
Say that again. I couldn't hear you. Cut off.
Oh, I'm sorry. Would you state that all we need to affirm an ancient individual's historiography is an ancient artifact? Such as, let me give you an example. Or matter of fact, let me ask you this question. Do you believe that John the Baptist is real? or was real?
You know, I never thought about that. But since we're having a debate, you know what? I'm indifferent because John the Baptist, who is he? He's really not important to me. So, yeah, I don't have an answer for that one. I haven't thought about John the Baptist being real or fake. Jesus is definitely fake in the New Testament, Jesus. But John the Baptist, I haven't thought about it, so I couldn't give you a firm answer. But keep going.
Okay. Do we have multiple evidences of ancient history that attest to John the Baptist's historicity?
What you have to understand is this. I know where you're going with this. With ancient history, Michael Licona would tell you ancient history boils down to speculation. So I don't agree with the canons of ancient history anyway, because Mike Licona, Dale Martin, as you mentioned, Bart Ehrman would tell you, if you push them to the wall, history, the study of ancient history, is basically fallacious.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you done? I don't want to interrupt you.
No, here's the point. I'll say it really quick and I'll get out your way. Bart Ehrman once said, somebody asked him a question. It's like, well, how factual is your ancient history study of Jesus compared to how we do ancient history today in the 21st century? Bart Ehrman himself said, if you want to compare the work he does and other scholars do in the ancient historical work of the historical Jesus, if you want to compare that to how we do ancient history today in the 21st century, how we investigate history of today, then he says you can't say anything about the Bible or Jesus. That's how fallacious studying the ancient historical Jesus is. Even Bart Ehrman said, if you're going to compare it by the criteria we use today to study history of today, like the Holocaust, he would say then, all of ancient history is fallacious. You have to give it some leeway.
Sure. Do we have any evidence of ancient history of a Jesus? Just a Jesus?
If you want to say my whole contention today is this.
I understand your contention today, sir, but I want to know if we can identify that any Jesus existed.
No. I'll give you the historical Jesus for this debate. I'll give it to you. A mere man, 5'1", 110 pounds, nailed to a cross, fed body to the dogs. I'll give you that. But I will not give you the superhero Jesus, the miracle worker. And you know what? Dale Martin and both Bart Ehrman back me. They'll give you the historical Jesus, but they will not give you.
Mr. Strong.
Go ahead.
Please answer the questions in a specific manner, please. We only have a limited amount of time.
I just did. He asked me a question.
Okay, thank you very much. If that was your answer, I would like to move on to my next question. What evidence does Dr. Ehrman or Daniel Martin use for substantiating the historical Jesus?
Oh, they use the Gospels.
But hold on. If they use the Gospels, would that not mean that they're giving credence to his historicity?
What was that you just said, your last couple words?
If they use the Gospels for identifying a historical Jesus, does that not give the Gospels credence for ancient historicity?
No, it doesn't, in the way you're saying. Because Bart Ehrman would he just said that if you compare...
I am very familiar with Dr. Ehrman's work, sir. I have all of his works, literally all of them, including his dissertation paper for his doctrinal work. So I'm very familiar with Dr. Ehrman's work. I would like to move on to my next question. You made a statement regarding Michael Licona and history, analyzation of history being pure speculation. I really don't understand that. Could you elaborate?
Yes, Mike Licona would tell you that we don't have anything from the first century. Anything. Zero. Anything Jesus, zero. Nothing. Any book of the New Testament, we don't have it. So when does Dr. Hold on. Okay, thank you very much for answering that. When does Dr. Licona place the originals of the New Testament? He speculates in the first century. But notice I said speculate.
How is that yes, how is that such? I see what I'm trying to get to is also the issue of harmonization. This is part of the reason why I'm still asking this question. Yes, how are you saying, okay, what kind of evidence would you be expecting if there was a God and he did speak?
What kind of evidence would I expect? I would expect
yes.
the Bible to be true. And I would expect, and if the Bible is true, Jesus said in Matthew 24 that before the Jews before him, he goes, before you guys die, I'm coming back. He says it. I'm coming back surfing the clouds. And Revelation 22, he says, I'll come back quickly. I come quickly. I would expect, if God was real, I would expect Jesus to already came back, like he said 2,000 years ago, and this would be all over with.
I don't have a problem with that. In fact, you and I would probably be fairly in agreement right there. Clearly, there's a difference in interpretation, but nonetheless, that's off of the topic tonight. Let's see. Did you agree with the Rudolph Boatman quote that I read earlier?
Go ahead and repeat that for the audience.
Sure, no problem. The historical method includes the presupposition that history is a unit in the sense of a closed continuum of effects in which individual events are connected by a succession of cause and effect. This closeness means that the continuum of historical happenings cannot be rent by the by the interference of supernatural transcendent powers, and that therefore there is no miracle in the sense of the word. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Miracles are fiction, so obviously I would agree with that.
The quote did not state that the quote did not state that miracles were fiction. The quote actually states that presuppositionally, using the historical critical method, which I don't believe you are using, actually would assert that you have to reject a priori miracles. And so what I'm asking you is if you would agree with Rudolph Boatman here.
No, I wouldn't agree with him at all.
Okay.
Because I reject miracles, period.
Okay. Let's see. Do you believe the original authors of the New Testament were Jewish?
Brother Ehrman said that one cannot really tell. Were they Jewish? I don't know. They're anonymous. And they,
what would be your answer to the extreme, the often quoted Jewish literature all throughout the New Testament?
No. Are you saying, do I believe the Gospels are written by Jewish people?
I'm asking that question. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. When do you believe the originals were originally manufactured? I know we've talked about scholarly opinion, but I want to know your personal opinion.
Well, scholarly opinion says that the Gospels were written in the 1st century, and that sounds about right to me. I mean, I wouldn't go against scholarly opinion in that area. I would say 1st century, no problem.
Thank you very much. That will conclude the first. Yeah.
Okay. That concludes our first cross-examination period. This is very exciting. I'm enjoying this a lot. Mr. Strong, you will now have an opportunity to cross-examine your opponent. Once again, you will only be asking questions. My opponent will only be making statements. I do realize that your opponent did make some statements in the last section, but they were clarification statements, and they were relevant to the original question. So I did let them stand, and I will do the same with you. And your 10 minutes will begin whenever you begin to speak.
Okay, my opponent. Do you understand that Dale Martin, because you talk a lot about Dale Martin, and I'm surprised because he's a Christian, but he'll be the first one to tell you that Dale Martin, like, hey, the the superhero Jesus, the miracle worker, as an ancient historian, that's thrown out the window. That's counted as that's not even considered. All the miracles of Jesus in the New Testament, Dale Martin would tell you, they're not even considered. Do you understand that? Yeah. I'm gonna ask you. Do you understand that?
Actually, no, I don't. No, I don't. Because as you stated, he is a Christian, so those are his personal convictions. And quite often, even on his online lectures, he says, I will throw on my theologian hat to answer A, and I will throw on my historian hat to answer B. So even though he does make a distinction between his theological conclusions and his historical conclusions, he would actually agree with the majority of statements in which I have made tonight. So I don't necessarily see that.
I took his online course at Yale University. He would totally disagree with you.
Is this a question or a statement, Mr. Strong?
Okay, I'm going to ask a question right now. Dale Martin would tell you, I'm going to ask you, do you realize Dale Martin makes a giant divide between the historical Jesus that he studied as an ancient historian versus a superhero divine Jesus? Do you understand?
Well, first and foremost, I don't believe he would identify Jesus as a superhero, because I know for a fact that would be very anachronistic for a scholar. Secondly, yes, I am pretty sure that, as I just stated in my last answer, that I'm pretty familiar with Dr. Martin's work, and he does distinguish the theologicalness of his conclusions with his historiography of his conclusions.
Okay. Do you understand? Okay, I'm going to be more pointed I'm going to nail you right now. As an ancient historian, period, do you realize that Dale Martin will only give you a historical Jesus? He will not give you the Jesus that you believe in to be true. Do you understand that?
No, I don't, because I have read his book on speculation, in which show a very stark distinction between the Jewish and Christian understanding of what a quote-unquote speculation was versus an ancient Roman anti-Jewish understanding of what a quote-unquote speculation or miracle was. So, sir, as I stated earlier, I'm pretty familiar with Dr. Martin's works, and I am likewise. I've given an answer.
Do you realize Bart Ehrman? Let's move on to Bart Ehrman. Do you realize Bart Ehrman would tell you flat out that the miracles of the New Testament are discounted? They're not even considered. They're considered invalid.
I do not, sir, because I do not for one reason. Excuse me, sir. I do not for one reason. Dr. Ehrman wrote a book on the Da Vinci Code. Within the first 11 pages of the Da Vinci Code, he actually affirms that the early Christians, as far back as we can go, sometimes even before our manuscript tradition appears in history, that we have to analyze today, we can go into the church fathers such as Ignatius of Antioch, who was a disciple of eyewitnesses, and he was also succession of other eyewitnesses and leaders within the church, because the biblical story narrates the church moving to Antioch. So in all actuality, Dr. Bart Ehrman does affirm that the earliest Christians did believe that Jesus was divine, biblically and ex-biblically.
No. You're not listening to me, and you made the same mistake with Dale Martin. Both of them would tell you, as an ancient historian, when they do their ancient historian work as PhDs, the miracles of Jesus are not even considered. They're null and void. Do you understand that? That as an ancient historian,
sir, because as an ancient historian, Dr. Ehrman wrote a book. Dr. Ehrman wrote a book that exposes the misunderstandings as propagated by the Da Vinci Code. So no, sir. And his title on that book is A Historian Analyzes the Da Vinci Code. I have no other option but to analyze his words within the context in which he places them.
Okay, let me ask you this. How does an ancient historian do their work as an ancient historian if they include miracles?
First and foremost, the ancient. Excuse me.
Let me rephrase that. How does an ancient historian, because ancient history is study of the natural world, not the supernatural. Dale Martin And Bartman will tell you that. Ancient historians, they study the natural world. So how can they study the supernatural when, by definition, ancient historians only study the natural world?
Again, sir,
so
that begins. It's very simple. It all begins with the original quote that I gave from Rudolf Bultmann. The historical critical method presents a truncated view of the world in which miracles cannot happen. That is the view in which some of these authors take, some of these scholars take. And by the way, you have other philosophy doctors in history and theology, just as Ehrman's textual critic in New Testament studies, likewise Martin. You have other scholars that would disagree with their methodology for analyzing, like N.T. Wright. So the scholarly opinion and the scholarly issue... The scholarly issue first has to be analyzed in light of the presuppositions.
Okay. Let me ask you again. So, are you saying that N.T. Wright would say that as an ancient historian, he can include miracles?
N.T. Wright, as an ancient historian, sure. N.T. Wright, as an ancient historian, has written books in which he actually quotes other Jews, which affirm the historicity of the resurrection account of Jesus. One of these Jews in which he quotes is Dr. Punkus Limpede, who was one of four 1980 Jewish scholars that was actually trained in New Testament studies.
No, hang on. I think this entire time you're just not getting what I'm saying. I'm asking you that do you realize that all these guys,
I do not, sir.
Historian, when they study the historical Jesus, do you realize that they don't include miracles?
I do not, sir. Sir, I do understand your question, and I'm telling you that there is a difference in the scholarly opinion. I can quote evangelical scholars that would actually have no problem with analyzing the sources and the miracle stories at face value and even deeper in the critical level. The only issue is you reject miracles a priori.
Okay, can you demonstrate a miracle? Okay, since you want to stand on miracles.
I sure can, sir. I sure can, sir. Abiogenesis.
Hey.
Abiogenesis.
No, when I say miracle, walking on water.
Abiogenesis. Excuse me, sir. Are you denying that abiogenesis is actually empirically tested?
Hey, I'm asking the questions.
Yes,
you're answering.
Abiogenesis.
The rules of my opponent. You're going against the rules of my opponent. I'm asking a question.
Abiogenesis, sir.
Okay. Can you walk on water? Go ahead.
Excuse me, sirs. Yes. Once again, questioner, which is Mr. Strong, only ask questions. Mr. Thompson only answer in the form of statements. I'm going to put 30 seconds back on the clock, and we will continue. Thank you.
How much time do I have, moderator?
30 seconds.
You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay.
Yes, sir.
My opponent, can you walk on water? That's plain enough.
No, I can't.
Can you walk on water?
No, I can't.
Can you fly in the air?
No, I can't.
Okay, do you realize that the Bible says that in John 14:12, Jesus said that anyone who believes in me will be able to do these miracle works I've done and more?
I sure do.
Do you understand? Okay. So once again, I'm going to ask you, can you walk on water?
No, I can't.
Can you raise the dead from the grave?
No, I haven't.
Can you empirically prove Jesus is real?
I can't empirically prove any ancient individual.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Outside of bone. Outside of bone fragment.
No. I asked you a specific question. Don't evade it. Can you empirically prove Jesus is real?
Actually, I would make that argument that yes, I could, because we have ancient artifacts that attest to his life.
No. Okay, can you empirically prove the
again, sir? Yes.
Alive today?
I'm sorry. Could you restate the question?
I broke up. Let me move on. Can you empirically prove that Christian God is real?
Yes, but I am in a sense, because I'm substantiating Jesus' historicity and the historical. The Christian faith is in essence encapsulated in history as being centered upon one individual, which is Jesus.
Mr. Strong, if you could please be respectful to your opponent and refrain from laughter. This is an act.
That's fine.
Once again, Mr. Strong, you will have another opportunity right now to cross-examine your opponent. Your 10 minutes begins right now.
Okay, I want to let me write my time down. Now, you said you can demonstrate God being real, the Christian God. How?
Yes, I can.
How can you empirically demonstrate that your God is actually real today now? How can you demonstrate that?
Excuse me, sir. We have ancient artifactual evidence that attests to Jesus' life. And in fact, this evidence is the earliest, most widespread, non-controlled collection of documents by the name of the New Testament, which has such a strong textual reliability behind it, as I quoted Dr. Ehrman earlier, is literally irrelevant to ask about the originals anymore because we're not getting that much further back in the history.
Okay, do you realize that everything you just said about being able to prove Jesus and God is real, do you realize that all Christians and all atheists and agnostics, scientists, doctors, philosophers, all would sit here and look at you and go,
I do not, sir. William Lane Craig argues in multiple debates that he can demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt in light of his syllogistic argumentation that the historicity of the resurrection of Jesus was real. So I do not believe that you are accurately representing all because you are using that in a generalized form. So I don't agree with that assumption.
Okay, that's fine. Now, how can you or William Lane Craig say you can demonstrate the resurrection of Jesus?
We have ancient evidence that attests to it, sir.
Let me finish the question. When in the first century, there's nothing. You realize that there's nothing of Jesus.
I disagree with that, sir.
Okay, what in the first century do we have of Jesus?
We do not have the originals. Excuse me, sir. I would like to answer your question. We do not have the originals of the New Testament, but we have the earliest, most widespread, non-controlled collection of ancient witnesses that all attest to, number one, the empty tomb. The rest of the synoptics outside of Mark attest to the resurrection because I disagree with the longer ending of Mark as a textual variant that was added later on in the tradition. So again, sir, if we have a tradition that is firmly according to internal and external witnesses placed within a certain time frame, all within a certain time context, that interestingly enough appears on the scene earlier than any other ancient manuscript or any other record of any ancient person, I'm sorry, sir, but I have to give the weightiness of the validity of the New Testament to the New Testament.
So are you okay? You're saying that you can prove factually, empirically, that Jesus is real.
Yes, sir, because we have ancient evidence that attests to it, written by multiple people from very early on.
Okay. How can you keep saying we have evidence for Jesus when I just told you the entire first century?
I disagree with your analysis.
How can you
disagree with your analysis, sir? I disagree with your analysis because this is correlating. Hold on. Okay. Go ahead. Ask your question.
Okay, let me ask you a question. So, what in the first, I want to nail you, man. What in the first century do we have of Jesus that any scholar would say this of the first century is of Jesus? His name on it.
As you have stated earlier, the New Testament scholars such as Dr. Dale Martin and Dr. Bart Ehrman all would attest that the original New Testament works were published and proceeded to go forth unto the world from the first century.
I did not ask you that. I said, what do you have right now of the first century of Jesus? Right now,
I have copies. I have the strongest textual text. I have the most textually sound document of all ancient antiquity, sir. I can't explain this anymore.
No, there's nothing to explain because I know you're wrong. Answer the question. What do you have in your hands of the first century of Jesus today?
New Testament. New Testament.
Okay.
Are you asking me if the manuscripts begin? Excuse me, sir. Okay. I would like to give you a better answer, but it seems as if you're giving me enough leeway to give you a random, the specific answer that I keep giving you. So I want to know for clarification, I would like to know for clarification, are you asking me if the manuscripts themselves date to the 1st century or not?
I'm saying very plainly, the audience can understand this. What in the 1st century do we have today of Jesus? Because
again, the audience would have to test us both for consistency, sir. And the consistency unanimously seems to be on my side here. I have scholarly opinion, and I have the strongest collection of ancient witnesses that the manuscript-wise are only, again, John, as I stated in my opening statement, John is the earliest attested New Testament book. Our manuscripts, excuse me, sir, our manuscripts of John have been dated to the 1st century.
No.
I'm sorry.
No, okay, my question is this. You're not getting me. You're not understanding. Just take a deep breath and listen. I'm not saying what dates to the 1st century. That's speculation. I'm asking you, what do we have of the 1st century of Jesus?
Well, that's interesting, sir. That's a very interesting question, sir. That's a very interesting question. If you were to ask the same thing in regards to any other ancient individual,
I'm speaking of Jesus.
Excuse me, sir. You are absolutely right. We are speaking of Jesus right now.
Thank you.
And I'm trying to answer your question to the best of my ability. Now, if we were talking about Jesus or John the Baptist or Paul, we have evidence in which has been transmitted, I would argue, accurately from the 1st century.
No, okay. Either you're being ignorant right now or you're willfully invading the question. So
I am not willfully invading the question, sir, because I cannot answer.
No, I don't have much time. But how can you sit here?
I'm going to pause this. Excuse me. Our time has stopped at 3:20. I'm going to try and moderate this to the best of my ability. What Mr. Strong seems to be asking you is if you have anything from the 1st century, and you answered him that some of the manuscripts of John were dated to the 1st century. Mr. Strong then said that is speculation. I guess then the method of dating would be the thing in question. Hold on. I guess where I'm getting lost is if you were to present Mr. Strong with evidence from the 1st century, it would seem that would still be speculation in his view as well. So
exactly.
I think that you have answered this question to the best of your ability for right now, and I think for the sake of the debate that we can move on.
Okay, but I will say this. That Bart Ehrman, all scholars will tell you, at this present moment, we don't have anything from the 1st century. That's what I'm trying to get at. But since we're asking questions, but I don't think you understand that.
I understand your argument, sir, completely.
It's not an argument. It's a fact. It's a fact.
I'm about to start the clock.
Okay.
Right now. Now go ahead, guys.
Questions?
Okay. How much time do we have, moderator? How much time do I have? Hello?
Should be about 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Thomas?
We have 3 minutes and 30 seconds on the clock.
Okay. I'm going to just ask you one more time, and I got to move on because there's only 3 minutes.
Sure.
Do you realize I'm asking you, what do we have of Jesus, of the New Testament, in our hands that dates to the 1st century? Not speculated to have started in the 1st century, but you said we have evidence for Jesus, right? And
yes,
I'm asking you, okay, no, hang on. I'm saying, okay, you say we have evidence. Okay, what in the 1st century do we have of Jesus in our hands that says, the New Testament or any inscriptions, carpentry works, anything of Jesus of the 1st century? What do we have in our hands of Jesus?
P52. Next question, please.
P52, that's dated to 125
Excuse me,
AD.
sir. You said that the date was not the issue because you argue over the date in the first place. As I've stated earlier, we have multiple scholars that have placed that document into the 90s.
Okay.
Actually, into the 50s and the 90s. So, if you want to say you disagree because scholars agree now that it's 125, sure. But I'm telling you, the manuscript has been dated before that. So your argument is either I don't know what it is. I don't know what your question is related to.
Okay. Do you realize let me pare it down even more. Do you realize mainstream scholarship puts that P52 at 125 AD?
Yes, I do.
And do you realize that the ones who say maybe 90 AD, that mainstream scholarship says these guys are crazy? Do you understand that?
Yes, they would also say that those who put the Gospel of John in the second century, hold on, those same scholars also would affirm that those who put the Gospel of John into the second century as its original are buffoons as well. So all of these same scholars you're utilizing for your consensus argument, they actually agree with me for the original document time frame.
Original documents? Didn't you just
time frame, sir?
No, hang on. Let me ask you a question. Didn't you just say what I said, that Bart Ehrman said that when it comes to original...
Yes, sir. Dr. Ehrman, and I agree with Dr. Ehrman.
That we don't have a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, et cetera, of any original book of the Bible. Do you realize
actually, that's not... I understand what he stated in his textual critical book, but I'm not sure if you're familiar with his argument not with an argument, but with his presentation in his YouTube video promoting the Historical Jesus book. Because he actually says those statements and says that's absolutely wrong when analyzing the historical Jesus. In that book, he actually identifies the Gospels as reliable first century manuscripts or originating in the first century. So if you keep hold on, can I please, you made a lot of statements. I'm trying to answer them completely, sir. Regarding the copies, I understand, but I don't know where you would place the originals. Because it seems to me you're arguing that they're not originally written in the first century.
That is
no.
So
I'm sorry.
That's time. That is
okay.
Okay. This is getting heated. I like it. Good stuff. Once again, questioner only ask questions, and the person answering, please answer in the form of statements unless you need clarification. I will put 10 minutes on the clock. This is the final section of the cross-examination, Mr. Thompson, that will start with you when you begin to speak.
Sure. Thank you very much. Tagging along with the last questions in which you were asking, Mr. Strong, I want to know, when do you believe the Gospels were written?
As I said before, they're speculated to have been written in the first century.
So when do you believe they were originally written?
Like I said, they were speculated. To me,
okay, I'll move on.
I'll answer. I speculate, too, that they were written in the first century. But we don't
Sure.
have
How do you get to that conclusion? How do you get to that conclusion?
Oh, I just accept mainstream scholarship that it is speculated to be written in the first century. I accept
so
it.
we need no internal or external... Hold on. We need no internal or external correlation for the identifying of these texts to be in the first century.
Say that again?
We don't need any information that can be correlated with in order to analyze if these documents were originally written in the first century?
I disagree with that.
Okay. Now, since you disagreed with that, I want to ask you another thing. Are you familiar with what P52 states?
It's only a small fragment, size of a credit card.
Are you familiar what is on the fragment?
I once was, but refresh my memory.
Sure. Just for those who are not familiar with textual criticism, P52 is possibly the oldest New Testament manuscript that we have cataloged today. Now, P52 is of the Gospel of John, and many scholars do assert that it was copied in 125 AD or CE. Now, in order to ask a question, I would like to, this is what it states. I'm sorry. It basically gives us testimony to the crucifixion of Jesus. I just want to know, how do you know that was the Gospel of John in the first place, since it is nothing more than a credit card piece of fragment?
It's all speculation. All this stuff you're talking about is speculation.
Speculation. Okay, sir. Okay, thank you for that answer. Thank you for that answer. Are you familiar with the most attested New Testament book in the manuscript edition?
Go ahead. Clarify.
It's actually the Gospel of John. And all the Gospel of Johns also have, interestingly enough, Bart Ehrman says that John 1:1 might have had a textual variant in its original, but he doesn't actually affirm that. Nonetheless, let me ask you this. I don't mean to jump topics here, but I know I want to ask you this, okay? Do you believe there's any evidence for Julius Caesar?
Yes.
Okay, what kind of evidence do we have for him?
Manuscript evidence, and I think there should be coins and busts of him.
How do we know those coins go back to him or to his time frame?
Speculation.
Speculation. So really, we don't know if Julius Caesar was real, right?
I believe it's real. Ancient history is all probability. It is very it's reasonable for me to believe that, hey, Julius Caesar was real. That's very reasonable. That's all ancient history can give you, because it's wiped away. All they can give you is probability. So yeah, it's very probable he lived. I personally believe he lived. I don't even speculate.
I'm not denying that you don't. Yeah. I'm not denying that you don't believe he lived. I was just trying to figure out how you got to the Julius Caesar, especially since you didn't have an answer earlier for John the Baptist, for example. Here's a good question. Do you believe that, hold on. Here's a good question. Do you believe there is any evidence outside of the Bible that attests to biblical people?
Biblical people such as?
That living in a certain time frame in history, such as the first century.
Yes.
Okay, who are these people that you believe are actually substantiated by secondary evidences?
One is Pontius. Whatever.
Pontius Pilate.
Yeah, Pontius Pilate.
What is the earliest evidence that you know of that attests to Pontius Pilate being a leader or the ruler of Judea?
I haven't studied. I once had that in mind, but I haven't studied that in a long time, so that has escaped my memory. So I couldn't give you any. Because my thing is Jesus, so not Pontius Pilate. So.
Oh, I think it would be very important in light of the correlation of the evidences. Nonetheless, let's see. Do you believe that Paul was real?
Paul is speculated. Some will say Paul is not real, but Paul is speculated to be real. That's I threw, I'll, for the sake of this debate, I'll accept him being real, but that's speculated.
Okay. Do you believe Paul was contemporaneous with eyewitnesses of Jesus?
It's speculated.
So is that your affirmation? Is that your affirmation of high probability?
Yeah, for the sake of this debate, I would say yes, that Paul was around during the time of Jesus.
So would you say, okay, so he met the eyewitnesses of Jesus, right?
If you read Galatians, it says that he met the pillars of the church, James, Peter. So for the sake of this for the sake of this debate, yeah, I would say that sounds very reasonable to me that was the case.
Okay. What gospel would you say was written first, or would you agree with the scholarly consensus that probably Mark was first? Yeah,
the scholarly consensus, Mark is first. Others have said Matthew, stuff like that. But yeah, actually Q, and they're based off Q. But
do you have any evidence for Q?
No, there is no evidence. All scholars will tell you Q is speculation.
I'm sorry. You said scholars will tell you Q is speculation or hypothetical.
It's and the way I'm using it, speculation and hypothetical, they're that's basically synonyms. They're the same. Theorize that Q was actually a document, but it's speculative. They would tell you we don't have any empirical proof. We can't prove that Q actually existed. But all the Gospels, they come together, they coalesce, and
what is the requirement?
The source.
Thank you very much. What is the requirement of presuppositions to believe that these authors utilize the same sources for compiling their text, whether it be Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John?
I'm sorry.
Okay, let me restate my question. In your opening statements or in your first rebuttal period, I'm sorry if I've mistaken when you've made this statement. You stated something like even the Gospel of John utilizes Matthew, Mark, and Luke for his compilation, right? For his work?
Yes.
Okay. Does John say himself that he is utilizing Mark, Matthew, or Luke?
First of all, John is an anonymous book, so the anonymous writer said no. The anonymous writer never said he was utilizing anybody's book.
Okay. Speaking of anonymous books, I'm glad that you brought that up. Do you know of any manuscripts of the Gospel of John that do not have John at the very top of them?
Oh, absolutely. You just named it. P52 doesn't have.
Oh, that's wonderful. But interestingly enough, you're identifying it as the Gospel of John, and earlier you said that you didn't know how they got to that conclusion. But nonetheless, that's very interesting. Hold on, I have another question, sir.
It's speculation.
I have another question, if you don't mind. Are you familiar with the Gospel of Mark, like the manuscript evidence for the Gospel of Mark?
Could you repeat that? You're cutting out, and I missed a big part of what you just said.
I'm sorry. I was asking if you are familiar with the manuscript evidence for the Gospel of Mark.
No. Refresh my memory. Put it in a nutshell.
I believe P46 is one of the earliest.
No, I'm not familiar with P46, but make your point, and I'll answer it for you.
Okay. My question regarding P46 and its attestation of New Testament books is the following. Are you familiar with any chapter or page of Mark that didn't have Mark at the top, just like many of our textual critical editions?
Well, if you're looking at fragments from the 2nd century, no, none of them have the title Mark. But if you look at whole documents right around the 3rd century, yeah, they do have it. So when you got the whole thing, yeah. But if you're looking at fragments, no. So in the 2nd century, none of them have any titles. They're all fragments from the 1st century. Some no bigger than a credit card, so none of them have it.
I'm glad you mentioned the 4th century codices because that's very interesting there. Is that time?
That's time.
Okay, well, never mind. Thank you very much, Mr. Strong.
Yeah, we actually got something done in that segment. So good job.
Okay. We are done with our cross-examination period for tonight, and just let me make a couple of comments. Just what I'm saying. It would seem that Mr. Strong, to affirm that something is written in the 3rd or 2nd century, like the Gospel of Mark, wouldn't you have to admit that's speculation as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at some point, you have to go along with speculation, or you can't say anything. But I just want to point out, it is speculation. It's not hard science. So I'm just letting the people know, we're not talking hard science like this book was written, 1991, but you got to speculate, because if you don't speculate and play the game of speculation, then you can't say it. Even Bart Ehrman said that. If you don't speculate, then you can't play the ancient story game, because it's all speculation.
All I'm just clarifying for the
audience,
the listeners. Yes, that's all. I don't have an opinion on it. I just want you to clarify. Okay. Mr. Thompson, you have the floor on the first closing statement, and it will begin when you start to speak.
Sure. First and foremost, I would like to thank for both the moderator, Mr. Thomas Cruz, and my opponent tonight for a very wonderful discussion. And again, listeners, audience members, please do not take these discussions, this debate, as an ending point, but as a starting point. Tonight you have heard quite a bit of information, data, scholars quoted, and interestingly enough, there was only one, maybe two, evangelical scholars quoted tonight. But I absolutely love it. And in fact, I want to sort of piggy up before I give some personal testimony for my closing statement. I want to piggyback on the last couple of things in which my opponent was just stating. My opponent just said that there is biblical studies, ancient historiography, ancient works and whatnot. This is not a science. I really don't understand where you get that from, because he's constantly appealing to scholars that have PhD research degrees, teaching in professional, Ivy League, top American schools, top schools around the world, let alone in America. And again, I would like to leave everybody off with this one quote from Dr. Ehrman, and now I'll begin with some of my closing statements here. Here we go. Where does Dr. Ehrman stand on this issue of the textual science, textual criticism science? Again, if the primary purpose of this discipline is to get back to the original text, we might as well admit either defeat or victory, depending on how one chooses to look at it. But we're not going to get much closer to the original text than we already are. At this stage, our work on the originals amounts to little more than tinkering with the text. There's something about historical scholarship and that refuses to concede that a major task has been accomplished. But there it is. Ladies and gentlemen, again, I just heard a quotation from Dr. Bart Ehrman, in which he actually considers his specialty, textual criticism, as something that historical scholarship must concede, because ultimately, regarding the original text, we're merely tinkering with the text. Tonight, before I close out, by the way, moderator, how much time do I have?
You have almost 7 minutes exactly.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. Yes, to close out tonight's debate, I want to point out one thing in regards to many of the claims that were being made tonight, especially by my opponent, especially when he says these things are facts, and then he goes to speculation, and then he's requesting for empirical scientific evidence for something he affirms himself as speculation. This harmonization thing just doesn't make much sense to me. Also, many of the things in which he stated in his opening and rebuttal period regarding the miracles and walking on water, et cetera, it just, again, doesn't make much sense to me. I definitely understand where my opponent is coming from, but again, the information is not necessarily being collated, I would say, fairly by my opponent. Before I close out with some personal statements, I would like to say that if you listen very closely, audience, I wanted you guys to test us both for consistency and harmonization. Today, we sort of got into the consistency issue, and I want to bring up a harmonization issue before I close and give personal testimony. The harmonization issue I wanted to bring up was sort of dealing with the question of not Josephus, but of John the Baptist, for example, and verifying his historicity, or even Julius Caesar and verifying his historicity. The reason why these are very interesting and yet intriguing issues to the historian is because in order to do history, you must harmonize. So if we find a coin with Julius Caesar's name on it, we have to figure out around what time these coins were manufactured, if Caesar was even in power etc. And then we also have to look at other documents that are claimed to have been written within the same time period, such as the New Testament, interestingly enough, for even Jesus gives credence to Julius Caesar's coins. But nonetheless, I'll let that be basically the conclusion of my argument for tonight, and I would like to close out by giving a little personal testimony on why I am so passionate about this issue. A few years ago, as the moderator began to give some basic information on myself, you found out that I was a caregiver and take care of my grandmother. I'm originally from Chicago, moved down to Georgia when I was younger, moved back up to Chicago to assist in taking care of my grandmother just 4 or 5 years ago. Now, within the 4 or 5 past years, I have been on an unbelievable historiography journey. You want to know why? It's very simple. Many of the arguments in which are being utilized by my opponent tonight actually identify not the Jesus of the Bible as being historical, but in a lot of cases it identifies the literally hypothetical, only here to identify Muhammad Jesus. That is absolutely right, guys. When I first moved back up here to Chicago to take care of my grandmother, I went to a gas station. I was approached by a clerk that also used much of the same arguments in which my opponent tonight has used for disproving or not accepting Jesus of the New Testament. My opponent made statements just like the Muslim clerk, in which I spent 4 long months analyzing and dealing with the issues of the historical Jesus with. And it's so interesting because, again, many of the claims in which my opponent is using literally sound like they're coming from a Muslim. And I know my opponent is not a Muslim. But let me just give you a couple of reasons why I believe this. First and foremost, the Muslim of the Quran, the Jesus of the Quran, is a floating individual. He's only in the Quran to give credence to Muhammad's historicity and prophethood. He floats around almost just like my opponent says the New Testament Jesus does, which, by the way, again, is being anachronistic with the evidence. But he's floating around speaking to some people. You'd never get an identification of where he is. You never get geographical locations. And it's literally just a hypothetical Jesus. This is why I'm so passionate about tonight's discussion, and I really do hope that my passion comes out, all for the search of truth, because I genuinely do believe that if you tested us both consistently in the search of truth, you would actually find a reasonable answer for understanding who the historical Jesus was. There were many things, again, discussed tonight, people, and I really wish that you take time, analyze both of our arguments, and sleep on them. Investigate them even more. Consider the validity of the consistency. And with nothing else really to say, guys, that would be my closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Strong, your 10 minutes will begin as soon as you begin to speak.
Okay, I would like to thank you, the moderator, Thomas Cruz. Great job. Also, my opponent. Great job. It was very feisty, very fun. Now I'll begin my closing statement. My opponent is a good guy. Any man that takes care of a close family member has my heart and love. So my heart and love goes out to you and your family member, my opponent. I respect that. I appreciate that, and that's a beautiful thing. I wish all family members took care of their own family members like that. We wouldn't need welfare and stuff like that. So I just want to give you a big shout out and much love for you, my opponent, taking care of your family member. Awesome, awesome, awesome. But back to the debate. My opponent, first of all, he brought up Bart Ehrman, Dale Martin. Notice this debate was about, does Jesus exist? But my opponent wanted to debate manuscripts. Like, no, we're supposed to debate, does Jesus exist? Can you imagine if Jesus came on the scene in the Bible saying, I'm God, we'll prove it. Well, let's talk about manuscripts. No miracles, no, just manuscripts. That doesn't make sense. Imagine the disciples like, well, let's just talk about manuscripts purely. So, forget. If you read the New Testament, folks, Jesus did miracles. One of the reasons he did miracles, why? To prove that what he said was real. The disciples, Peter, Paul, in the New Testament did miracles. Why? To prove that what they said was real. So we got the New Testament, all kind of miracles as proof that what they said was real. But in reality, we not only get no miracles from 2 billion Christians, but my opponent admitted he can't do miracles. That sounds kind of odd that in the New Testament, one of the criteria for telling the truth was do a miracle. Jesus did miracles in the Bible. The disciples did miracles. It said that Peter's shadow healed sick people. Just his shadow healed sick people. Apostle Paul said that the handkerchief touched Apostle Paul and it laid that handkerchief on the sick and they all got healed. All that was proof that, hey, they were speaking the truth. But in reality, my opponent admitted he can't do any miracles. He can't walk on water and fly in the air, and neither can 2 billion Christians. You see what's going on in the Bible, New Testament, all kinds of miracles as proof. In reality, nothing. Why? Because the New Testament is fiction, like Superman or Spider-Man. In those books, all kind of miracles. But in reality, nothing. No Superman, no Spider-Man, and no miracles. You see, the New Testament is no different. It's just like a Marvel comic book. The superhero character does all kind of things, right? Just like comic book superheroes. The central character does all kind of things. They die, they rise again and save the world. Jesus died, rose again and saved the world. If you read comic book superhero characters, they die and they rise up and save the world. And the whole time they're doing miracles, superhero stuff. Jesus is just an ancient superhero character. That's why he's not found in reality. Just like Spider-Man and Superman is not found in reality, the New Testament Jesus is not found in reality. So we came to debate does Jesus exist? But my opponent skipped any empirical evidence for Jesus. Why? Because he knows he has no empirical evidence. Not mathematically, not empirically, or experimentally. Why? Because the New Testament Jesus is fiction. That's why my opponent skipped reality of proving that his Jesus actually existed through bringing Jesus here or doing a miracle. He totally sidestepped that and got in a debate with me about manuscripts. Folks, it's a game my opponent played. He's a good guy, loving, takes care of his people, love him. But on a debate level, he totally skipped out on proving does Jesus exist. He wanted to talk about Julius Caesar and John the Baptist. And even John the Baptist, okay, you want to talk about John the Baptist, even John the Baptist demanded miracles like, hey, are you the one? And what did Jesus say in the Bible? Tell him, the dead rise, the blind see, the lame walk, miracles as proof. But my opponent offers zero empirical evidence. Why? Because the Bible is fiction. That's why in the Bible there's all kind of empirical proofs as from miracles. In reality, nothing. Because the New Testament Jesus is fiction. Now, moderator, how much time do I have?
Mr. Strong, you have approximately 5 minutes left.
Oh, perfect. So since we established through reality, common sense, that the New Testament Jesus is fiction, let me just go back to his Bart Ehrman, Dale Martin dialogue, since, he totally skipped out on trying to prove Jesus is real. Once again, I don't blame him, because Jesus is fiction. He can't prove Jesus is real. Period. He can't prove the Christian God is real. He can't prove Jesus is real. He can't prove heaven is real. He can't prove hell is real. He can't prove the Holy Spirit is real. He can't prove any of that. Zero. So he was forced to get me sidetracked with Bart Ehrman and Dale Martin. But what he doesn't realize, that I tried to make him realize, that all ancient history is speculation. Dale Martin, Bart Ehrman, Gary Habermas will tell you all ancient history, as far as historical studies, PhD level, is pure speculation. And I don't think my opponent understood that. Because if he understood that all ancient history is speculation, he wouldn't have brought it up. But I don't think he understood that. Or he understood it and hoped that you didn't understand it or I didn't understand it, but I understand ancient history. Ancient historical work study is all speculation. Once again, all scholars would tell you it's all speculation. Why? Because the entire first century knows nothing of Jesus. My opponent didn't understand that. I was trying to ask him again and again and again. Do you realize that the entire first century, we have nothing of Jesus? No manuscripts, no carpentry works, no nothing. He is void of the entire first century, which makes sense because the New Testament Jesus is fiction. But my opponent didn't, I don't know, he didn't receive it or whatever. I don't know what his issue was. But we don't have anything from the first century. He wants to say, well, scholars say that the Gospels were written in the first century. Fine, I accept that they were written in the first century by speculation. I was not asking speculation. I was asking empirical. What do we have in our hands? He says, well, even if we had in our hands, that would be speculation. True enough, I give him that. But I will accept mainstream scholarship speculation saying, hey, we all agree as a unit that this is from the first century. I'll take that, but we don't even have that. So we don't even have anything from the first century. Even on a speculation level, we don't have anything from the first century. And everything from the second century is all speculation. He wanted to pull out P52, written around 152, but like he admitted, that was speculation that it was written at 125 AD. 125 AD. Why is that speculation? Because we don't have any dates. It's just a piece of fragment. All the second century fragments are all speculation, because they're all undated, unsigned, origin unknown. They're all written in the third person. Like he had to admit, we don't even have a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, etc., 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 of any book of the New Testament. That's sad, folks. That's sad. That's not evidence. That's speculation about an historical Jesus. What my opponent didn't understand also, which leads to that ancient historians, as a PhD study, you don't include miracles. Christianity is not counted in the New Testament ancient historical studies. That's why a Muslim can be an ancient historian, a Jew, an agnostic, an atheist, a Hindu. Anyone can be an ancient historian. Why? Because you don't include miracles. So Jesus' miracles, they're not used. It's void. That's why I kept telling them. Dale Martin would tell them that, hey, when I speak as an ancient historian, my Christian faith is null and void in this area. It's null and void. It doesn't count. I'm speaking as an ancient historian, and as an ancient historian, you don't include miracles. They don't count. They're null and void. They're worthless. They're useless as an ancient historian. So him using Dale Martin and Bart Ehrman defeated his point, because they would tell him, hey, to my opponent, you can't use Christianity. Christianity doesn't count. Miracles doesn't count. Jesus is stripped down to just a mere man, historical figure. Now, my moderator, can I ask you one more time, how much time do I have left?
5 seconds, unless you want to go in an additional 2 minutes, which I'll allow, as I stated earlier in the debate.
That you said 5 seconds?
I said you can go up to 2 minutes extra.
Okay, 2 minutes extra. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much, moderator. So, like I said, my opponent, to use Bart Ehrman and Dale Martin, he hasn't studied them. I tried to ask him during the asking period. He doesn't understand ancient history, how they do their studies. He doesn't understand Bart Ehrman and Dale Martin, because they both refute him. They would say to him, your Christianity doesn't count. The miracles of Jesus, they don't count. Don't even bring them up. They're not included. All they look at is a mere man Jesus. That's it. A mere man who lived, died, got crucified, hung on a cross, and his body was likely fed to the dogs. That's what they view the historical Jesus. They don't look into the superhero Jesus, the Jesus of Christian faith. That does not count. It doesn't even come into the equation. So my opponent needs to go back and study ancient history. And to finish it up, we're here once again to debate, is Jesus, the New Testament Jesus, the miracle worker, the superhero, is he real? My opponent didn't even go there. My opening statement was all about showing that the superhero Jesus, the miracle worker, is fiction. Totally fiction. My opponent skipped that. He wanted to get into manuscript. John the Baptist, Julius Caesar. He wanted to get way over here, which had nothing to do with proving is the superhero Jesus real. The miracle worker, the guy that flies in the air, disappears in the air, flies up into the cosmos, disappears behind clouds, rises from the dead, raises dead people. He did not want to touch that. But the debate was about that guy. And science shows us, archaeology shows us, Dead Sea Scrolls shows us, technology shows us, everything shows us that guy, the flying guy, zipping through the air is fiction. But there might just be a 5'1", 110-pound Jesus with dark skin and curly hair that walks around. Thank you very much.
Okay, as the moderator of the debate, I would like some clarity. I would like to spend a few minutes, if the opponents agree, and I would like to ask them a couple of questions on the record. Is that okay with you guys?
Awesome.
I have no problem with that.
Okay, this will be between me and the participants in the debate. I'd like to start with Mr. Strong. Mr. Strong, if Mr. Thompson was to provide you with a piece of evidence from the first century regarding Jesus, would you be able to say that that's invalid because it's mere speculation?
If he was to provide me a first century document with Jesus' name on it, or what was, rephrase that again?
Well, I'll state it like this. You have said that several of these New Testament documents can only be dated to around 125 AD.
Yes.
Okay. Now, wouldn't you also have to say that all that is speculation, and they could be written in 50 AD?
Yeah. Like I said in my closing statement, and it's all speculation. All the dates, whether when the originals were supposed to be written, that's speculation, and what we have of the second century is all speculation. You got to play the game. So I will play the game, and if mainstream scholarship says, "Hey, this is written in the 80 AD," I'll accept it. It's part of the speculation game, but it is speculation.
I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, all ancient history, including Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, Plato, Aristotle, all of these people. I'll use the example of Julius Caesar because you said that you believe that he existed. Now, in order to affirm that he existed, it would seem that you are using the same speculation that you use to say that Christ did not exist. And what it seems like is it all comes down to the plausibility of the supernatural.
Yeah, the supernatural is, as you know in our debate we had last week, the supernatural, me as an atheist, is fiction. All scientists would tell you we haven't found any supernatural, so that's speculation. Supernatural is speculation, and when the gospel was written was speculation, and the second century documents we have is speculation. So everything Christians have, you guys have, is all speculation.
Mr. Strong, would you say that if Jesus died for 3 days and raised from the dead, he was dead and then brought to life, would you say that that is in fact supernatural?
Absolutely. That would be supernatural, thus rejected by ancient historians as an ancient historian and as me as an atheist. Fully rejected.
Well, can I ask you this? You stated in the last debate that you affirmed evolution. Do you affirm abiogenesis, which states that life came about from things that were not alive?
Yeah, my opponent said that. That I haven't looked into. So I don't accept that because I haven't looked into how they came to that conclusion that non-life jumped into life. So that I don't have a comment on. My opponent said it, but I haven't looked into it hard enough. I have to study it, see what they're talking about to give you an answer.
Right. Well, Mr. Strong, the reason I bring that up is because it is the cornerstone of evolution theory. Anyway, that's all I have. I have a couple questions for Mr. Thompson.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Strong said that there wasn't any evidence of Christ in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I don't think that you addressed that. Is that a true or false statement?
Actually, that's a true statement for one simple reason. It's actually pretty interesting because there's quite a few documents inside of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and when we're talking about the textual documents, we have to talk about also the reliability of these documents, their actual internal evidences or whatever they're talking about. And yes, that is true. The Dead Sea Scrolls do not speak of Jesus. That's a known fact. I don't have any problem with that. That's why I didn't bring it up. Now, I must say one thing in regards to that because I am familiar with one manuscript which has been computerly analyzed to have been claimed to have been written roughly within the 1st century. And it is a Qumranic text, meaning that it comes from the Dead Sea or the caves at Qumran. And it's a little fragment that only has, I believe 2 words on it, and one of the words is kia, which in Greek means and, or might be a stand-in for a period, because there were no identifiers in the manuscripts of uniform or majuscule text, uncial or majuscule text, which just means none but straight letters, line by line. Now, on this manuscript, which was found in the Qumran's cave, the only way we can analyze it, and again, the only thing that's on it is kia, which means and I would agree with Dr. Daniel B. Wallace there that it is not a gospel manuscript, even though the computers say it is.
Okay. In regards to P42, when do most mainstream secular scholars say that it was written?
You said P42?
Yes.
Or P52?
The 52, I'm sorry.
Okay. Most mainstream scholars would affirm that it was written in roughly 125 AD. Now, there is a 25 to 50 year gap in between the estimates. This explains why we have the specific date of 125, because some scholars have gone anywhere from 25 to 50 years before, or around that. So that's literally the middle point, and that's the methodology. The methodology used for dating manuscripts is paleontography, where scholars such as Dr. T.C. Skeet and other scholars analyze the manuscripts in the writing form on the documents. So they compare the manuscripts that are old. We can tell through the addition of years, copying methods, how well an individual did in making their letters, et cetera, et cetera. The whole textual issue is a historical issue.
Okay. And I guess that's all. Those were several things I was actually curious about in the debate.
Okay.
But anyway,
can I make one more statement regarding P46? Because I know that you were thinking P52. P46 is actually a great manuscript to show that even though we have a varied age collection of manuscripts, whether our manuscript tradition actually does begin in the 2nd century or if some of the documents actually do go back to the 1st century, is sort of here or there. But P46, P52, and Codex Sinaiticus actually show that manuscripts were copied accurately with the use of multiple lines of transmission. So the more lines of transmission that you have, the easier it is to identify when a textual change was made, whether it have been that individual author or the copyist making a scribal error, or homoteleuton where they skipped over a word, or paraplepsis where they go to the same ending of a term and they just keep on going from their copy. And we also have to consider the many different forms of methods for producing the manuscripts, because it was not always simply a sit down, copy a manuscript. We have scriptorium records in New Testament and church father tradition that talk about people sitting in rooms and writing down manuscripts while someone's reading it or reciting it. And then you also have times where authors are comparing manuscript by manuscript and writing and writing and writing. So the different means by which the manuscript tradition comes actually substantiates the historicity and the accuracy in transmission, to such an extent that even Dr. Ehrman has to admit, when we're dealing with textual critical issues, we're dealing with historical issues, and we're basically tinkering with the text in light of the evidence that we do have today.
Okay, and I have one more question for Mr. Strong, and then we'll close this out. Are you there, Brett? Are you there, Brett?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Okay. The last question I have, if ancient history is all speculation, could every scholar that you quoted be wrong about the historical Jesus?
They themselves would admit that. They would say, hey, we could be wrong about the historical Jesus. That's why, Richard Carrier, there's plenty of people out there, scholars, that will say, well, not plenty, they're on the fringe, but there are a few scholars like Richard Carrier, Robert Price, double PhD guy, that will say, hey, the New Testament Jesus, even as a historical figure, is fiction. So they won't even give you that. I'll give you a 5'1", 110-pound guy crucified, body fed to the dogs.
What I'm actually talking about, Mr. Strong, is if all of ancient history is in fact speculation, could all these historians be wrong? And could Jesus actually have been who he said he was?
No, Jesus could not be who he said he was, because miracles are fiction. Science shows us miracles people don't walk on water and fly in the air, so no, Jesus can never be who he said he was. And he never said it. That's hearsay. Other people put that in Jesus' mouth. We don't have anything from Jesus, so it's all hearsay. So it's even speculation that Jesus said what he said, let alone did he exist as a mere man.
May I ask one question? I just got one question.
So basically, at the end of the day, it all comes to presuppositions. But what's your? Is this a question for Mr. Strong?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead and ask it. Go, I'm ready.
Okay.
All right. I think I just forgot it. Go ahead,
What?
Thomas. My bad.
Well, that's okay.
Well, I tell you what, Thomas, you're gonna have a podcast out pretty soon, so I'll definitely visit on your podcast. And
believe me,
and,
you're going to be on the show. We're going to have you.
Oh yeah, and Thomas, he's gonna appear on my YouTube channel too in a little while. So a month or two, I'm gonna have him do a guest appearance on my YouTube channel. So this won't be the end of our 3 dialogue, okay?
All right,
cool
guys.
with
Well,
that.
on behalf of biblicallyapologetic.wordpress.com and this Facebook page and the soon to be announced podcast, which I actually have to think of a name, me and I do. We thank everyone, and we will see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Hi, this is Thomas Cruz. If you enjoyed that debate, please subscribe to our channel, Biblically Apologetic. If you would like to download any of the debates that you've heard, please visit our website at biblicallyapologetic.wordpress.com. If you have any comments or would like to debate a specific issue, please contact us at biblicallyapologetic@gmail.com.